In the passage of Scripture that was read just a moment ago, we have a very interesting statement by Jesus, by John, which reflected an earlier statement that Jesus had made. And that statement was just simply this: overcome. This is the victory that overcomes the world, even our faith, John said. Just before Jesus was crucified, he met with his disciples and he said, I have overcome the world. Within hours of that statement, Jesus was crucified. What a great paradox we have here. A man saying, I have overcome the world, and then within hours, he was crucified. There was an interesting story that was put into a movie back in the 1990s, I believe. The name of the movie was Rudy. Maybe some of you saw that movie. Rudy was based on a real story, an actual happening. There were things in the movie that were not exactly the same as real life, but that's just kind of the way movies are and the way real life is, isn't it? Here's what the story really was about. He was a young boy who lived up in Pennsylvania, and his father worked in a steel mill. Rudy was a little guy. He was about my size. Well, not football player size, about my size, and he really wanted to play football for Notre Dame someday. That was what he just had as his goal in life. He pictured himself running out of the tunnel, you know, and bursting through this paper thing and running out on the field and so forth. He just pictured himself with all of these things, but he was a little fellow. And he didn't particularly like school, and so he didn't make very good grades. But when the time came, he made application to Notre Dame and was turned down. He didn't have the grades. He couldn't get a scholarship or anything like that. But he went to a small junior college there in South Bend, and he began working. He made application again, and he was turned down again. The next year, he made application again to Notre Dame, and he was turned down again. And finally, the last time that they allowed multiple applications to come in, he was finally accepted on a provisional state. Well, he showed up from football practice. He wanted to be a football player. He was the smallest fellow around, no scholarship, but they let him drill with the team and all that. But the thing was that Rudy showed a persistent spirit. And they'd knock him around and beat on him and everything like this, and he seemed like he always got up. When time came to set up the roster, you know, separate the sheep from the goats, I guess you might say, Rudy was not chosen. But Rudy did finally get on the defensive practice squad. And so those big guys would just push him around the whole place. But Rudy, in all of this, Rudy was so determined that he was going to be a Notre Dame football player. He never had dressed out. But he was so determined that they noticed that when they knocked him down, he got back up. When they pushed him around, he always responded well. And Rudy established among the team members, he established the idea of persistence. Nobody could overcome Rudy. Well, he was a senior then. He still had never dressed out. The last game came up. There's a little confusion here between what really happened and the story of what happened. But the team stood up for Rudy. They knew he wanted to dress out. And they stood up for Rudy. And finally the coach said, okay, we'll let him dress out. And so he did. He sat on the bench the whole time. And then the last play of the game, they finally sent Rudy in. Rudy sacked the quarterback on the other team. His one play, his one time, and he was successful. His teammates picked him up and carried him off the field on their shoulders. And then at the end of the movie, there was this little epitaph. Up until that time, Rudy was the only Notre Dame football player who had ever been carried off the field on the shoulders of the teammates. I don't know whether that's happened since or not. But what does that tell us? Folks, it tells us that there are struggles in life that we simply have to overcome. This is what life is like. This is what life is about. We can give up. We can give up on our families. We can give up on our husbands, our wives, our children. We can give up on the church. We can give up on business. We can give up on anything that comes along. But if we do, we'll never win the victory. The word overcome is a word that's found quite a number of times in the New Testament. I went back and read the stories of the 7 churches of Asia there in the first part of the book of Revelation. You know, he says, well, this church, you're doing this. That church, you're doing this. I have this against you. I have that against you, and so forth. And he even came to the church at Laodicea, and he didn't say anything good about that church at all. But for each one of them, every single one of them, he says, overcome. Overcome. That's the key to life. That is the key to success. That's the key to family. That's the key to church. That is the key to life. Learning to overcome. Well, I think sometime about this word temptation along that line. And as I was preparing this lesson, sermons evolve as you go along. And as I was preparing this lesson the other day, I thought, there's a progression here. This follows this, and so forth. And I wrote these down. Temptations come. What comes then? Struggles. Struggles come. And then if we succeed in those struggles, we have overcome. And overcoming brings what? It brings the victory. So there's a kind of a progression here that's very important. And then I got to thinking, boy, that's true of not just of bad things we're tempted with. That's true in all kinds of roles in life, isn't it? Well, I started thinking along the line of temptation. I guess we all have temptation. And I guess this is the reason that I was thinking along that line. Every day that we go out and do something at work or at home or at play or at school, wherever it might be, temptations come to us. Temptations of all sorts. And by the way, the word temptation doesn't just necessarily mean have to do with something bad. I remember when I was illustrating this in a class in Vienna when I was there, I went over to the window and I looked out on the second floor. I looked out and I said, oh, good night. There's a little girl there that just fell. It looked like she really hurt herself, and there's nobody down there to take care of her. I said, I'm just tempted to leave the class and go down there and take care of her. And they thought it was so real. Some of them went to the window to see. Well, no, I was trying to illustrate a point. I was trying to say we can be tempted to do good things too, can't we? What is the essence of temptation? What's at its roots? desire. That's what temptation really is. It's desire. If you take desire out of temptation, there ain't no such thing. There's no temptation without desire. And there's not a temptation to go down and help that little girl without the feeling, I would like to do this. I want to do this. Temptation has desire. If we stop to think about temptation and desire, it kind of tells us something about ourselves. What am I tempted to do? Let's talk about temptation for just a moment. Temptation to sin. If temptation and desire are so dynamically linked here together, how do I control my desires? Well, the way I control my desires is by choosing the right friends. I've noticed this about myself. When I'm with good people, I tend to be a better person. When I'm with bad people, well, I'm not going to go there. You know what I'm talking about, don't you? So it's so important as our children come up that they see that the friends that their parents have are friends that they could emulate, friends that they could imitate. I'd like to be like him. I'd like to be like her. I remember when I was growing up, I remember some of the people at church, some of the men. One fellow in particular, Bill McCarty. Bill McCarty was always such a playful fellow. We knew his whole family. He was always such a playful fellow. He always had time for us kids, you know what I mean? He always had time for us. And I thought, what a wonderful person he is. And then there were others the same way. What kind of example am I leaving? What kind of friends do I have that really encourage me to be a better person? My best friends need to be Christian friends. My best friends need to be people that will encourage me in the Christian life, lift me up when I'm down, come to my aid when I need. People who will show what is right. There's a statement in Proverbs that I really like. Proverbs chapter 6 and verse 28, he says, can a man walk on hot coals without his feet being scorched? This was spoken of one who commits adultery. You know, if my best friends are people who are immoral, the tendency is for me to go along with them. Let me tell you a true story. It took place during the Second World War. There was a young man in Salerno, Italy. They had been successful in their battle. Things were quiet. And now the Italian girls were very, very attractive. And so there was a group of these fellows who decided one weekend they would go off into the city and find some girl somewhere that they could spend the night with. There was one young man there who was a little dubious about this. And as they started off, he said, wait. This is Wednesday night, he said. At home, at the Charlotte Avenue Church of Christ, there are people who are praying for me. I know that because they prayed for me before. And he said, I cannot go and do what we're talking about and betray those people. He was so effective in that presentation that the other three decided that they would not take part in that either. So somehow or another, the arms of friends and the arms of family and the arms of other people within that congregation reached out to embrace that young man. Why? Because his friends helped him in his struggle. His friends helped him in his struggle. It really made no difference how far away they were. It was because of the closeness of that relationship. How do I control my desires? I control my desires by keeping good friends. Well, there's some other things here too. I control my desires by regular spiritual worship. I cannot overemphasize the importance of worship. I believe with all of my heart that in corporate worship, I'm not talking just about in home, I'm talking about in the congregation, in corporate worship. There's something about us that we exchange with each other. Being close together, singing together, praying together, having fellowship with one another. These things make a difference in one's life. Not just because you're sitting here, not because we're present, but because we're participating. Because it is a part of me. I am a part of it. And when we leave worship, and we've really participated in the worship, when we do that, we go away as different people. Someone has said, you cannot meet another person and commune with that person without both of you going away as different people. I don't know to what extent that is true, but I believe with all of my heart that there is a grain of truth in that. I become like you in worship. You become like me. We become like each other. So one of the ways that I control my desires is by having such a close relationship with people within the congregation. I will not do so and so because I won't betray my fellow Christians. Well, these struggles that we have are kind of the next thing. All day long at your work, at your school, in your home, or you're struggling against something. We're all struggling about something. How to spend my time. Maybe how to apologize for what I've done. Maybe how to ask for forgiveness. But we all struggle in these things. What's the goal of our struggle? What are we trying to accomplish in our struggle? Well, there are all kinds of things here. Some people struggle just in order to win. Well, that's okay if it's a legitimate win. Some people struggle in order to hold things together within a business or within a family or within a group of friends. There are all kinds of goals that we have for our struggles. The Apostle Paul made a statement that's interesting to me. In Ephesians 6, he says, "For our struggles are not against flesh and blood." Now, stop and think about Paul in the first century, persecution and all. Our struggles are not against flesh and blood, but against rulers, against authorities, against powers of this dark world. And then he shifts gears a little bit. Against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. Therefore, you know the old thing is, when you see the word therefore, look and see what it's there for. And so Paul says, since this is the way life is, it's filled with struggles. Therefore, he says, put on the full armor of God, so that when the day of evil comes, you may be able to stand your ground. And after you have done everything, to stand. Folks, we have to stand for something. We can't be mamby-pamby just moving through life, approving of everything and everybody and all that's being done. We have to stand for something. We struggle. And we struggle for the purpose of overcoming, of becoming something that we aren't right now, of becoming something that is better than we ever supposed we could be. Beginning in a couple of weeks, we're going to start talking in our Sunday morning Bible class about fruit of the Spirit. Fruit of the Spirit. Boy, I wish every one of us would come to that class, because it's going to be a class of real practical things: love, joy, peace, long-suffering, goodness, kindness, things like that. But Paul begins by saying, this is what the Spirit will produce in your life. The fruit of the Spirit. I love that passage. It's the fruit of the Spirit. You see, we can struggle and struggle and struggle, but not allow God to dominate. We can try to be better. We can try to be more loving. We can try to be a more patient person. But we have to open our lives for God to come in and help us with those struggles. That's the way we overcome. That's the way these things become permanent and meaningful in our lives. Well, what about these struggles? Paul says they're not easy. They're not easy at all. Paul said in Galatians chapter 6, I've wondered about this. I don't really know what this passage means. I have an idea. But listen to what he says. He says, I bear in my body the marks of Jesus. He had been persecuted. All kinds of bad things that happened to him. And you know, he wrote just a little statement in the book of Romans that is so declarative about him. He said, my heart's desire and prayer to God for Israel is that they be saved. My heart's desire. What is your heart's desire? It's primarily shown by the kind of person that you are. Now, let me read to you a few things that have happened to him. In 2 Corinthians chapter 11, he says, I have worked much harder. He had been accused of not being on a level with the rest of the apostles. And he says, I've worked much harder. Now listen to what he says. I've been in prison more frequently. I've been flogged more severely. I have been exposed to death again and again. 5 times I received from the Jews 40 lashes minus 1. 3 times I was beaten with rods. I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. I spent a night and a day in the open sea. I have been constantly on the move. I've been in dangers of rivers, in dangers of bandits. I've been in dangers of my own countrymen. I've been in dangers of the Gentiles, in dangers of the city, in the country, in dangers at sea, in dangers among false brethren. I've labored and toiled, and I've often gone without sleep. I've known hunger and thirst. I've often gone without food. I've been cold and naked. Besides everything else, I face daily the pressure of my concern for the churches. You see why he could say, my heart's desire is that they be saved. Because his life reflected what his desire was. He saw his struggles as fulfilling because his struggles had to do with the spread of the gospel. Folks, what about my struggles? What about my temptations? But this is what brings the victory. It's because Paul was able to overcome in all of those things that the victory finally came to him. You know, we have so few struggles in some ways. Compared to those early Christians, they didn't know what was around the corner. That may be one who would persecute. They didn't know whether their business would thrive or whether it would be closed up because they were Christians. You know, it isn't the things that happen to me that are important in life. Boy, as I look at what went on with Paul, I might say, wow. Why didn't he quit? And when discouragements come to us, a little bit of discouragement, oh, I think I'll quit. Look at what Paul did. All kind of things. And he said, besides all of that, I have all this anxiety about what's going on in churches that I have established. That's the reason he could say, but my heart's desire. My heart's desire. Well, what's the set of my sail? I said a moment ago, it isn't what happens to me that's really important. How do I respond to what happens to me? There's a death in a family, and a man says, if God would allow something like this, I couldn't believe in a God like that. And the same thing might happen in the life of another man, and he'll say, I've got to draw closer to God. It's how we respond. Back in the early 1900s, or maybe the late 1800s, a lady by the name of Ella Wilcox wrote this little brief verse. One ship sails east, another sails west. While the self-same breezes blow, 'tis the set of the sail and not the gale that bids them where they go. As the winds of the air are, so are the waves of fate. As we voyage along through life, 'tis the set of the soul that decides our goal, and not the storms and the strife. One of my sons was the skipper of the sailing club at Pepperdine while he was there. He's a big sailor now. I've been out with him. A good sailor can almost sail 100% against the wind. They know exactly how to get where they're going because they know what the set of the sail and the position of the rudder have to be. And sometimes they have to zigzag the course as they go. But they make way. They get to their destination. Why? Because of the set of the sail. Let me ask you, what is the set of your soul? What is the set of the sail that guides you through life? Is it just the circumstances that come? Is it just the events of life, good or bad, that push me in this direction or in another? Or am I so set on the Lord Jesus Christ that no matter what happens in my life, there's nothing that will take away from my course? Temptations and struggles, and we overcome, and we find the victory. And finally, just as John is winding up the book of Revelation, and next to the last chapter, the 21st chapter, after he's talked about the beauties of heaven, the golden streets, describing a spiritual existence by giving us beautiful, wonderful physical things. And after he has described all of that, he says, he who overcomes will inherit all of this. And I will be his God, and he will be my son. I wish it stopped there, but it doesn't. Listen to the rest of the verse. But the cowardly and the unbelieving, the vile, the murderers, the sexually immoral, those who practice magic arts and idolaters, and get this one now. Say something about this tonight, by the way. And all liars. Their place will be in the fiery lake of burning sulfur. This is the second death. Look at the contrast. So I ask again, what is the set of your sail? What is the goal? What is your course? You and I need to learn that in the struggles of life, we can overcome and we can have the victory in Christ. If you're not a Christian today, oh, let me tell you something. You're missing the greatest life that you can imagine. Not the easiest life you can imagine, just the greatest. The most rewarding life because you know that you're in a relationship with God. He strengthens you. He gives you hope. He gives you the view of the future, not whether it's bright or dim, but the future where you know He will always be with you. If you're not a Christian and you would become a Christian today, we're going to sing an invitation song. With faith in your heart, turn away from sin. Come and be baptized into Christ for the forgiveness of your sins. Let's stand together and sing.